If you ever get deja vu while watching the Matrix sequels, that is by design. Today I want to share some of my favorite details about the Matrix sequels, particularly in the cinematography and the editing that are meant to serve as visual and thematic callbacks to the original movies. Some are subtle, some are not so subtle, but all of these I think are interesting enough to point out because you can help appreciate the amount of detail and thought that was put into these movies. Check it out. Let's start by talking about the first of the Matrix sequels, The Matrix Reloaded. In the first movie, during the dojo training scene, Morpheus does this sweet slow motion jump. Look at that. Note how the shot and sequence is set up. We've got a wide shot, Neo is on the bottom left on the ground, Morpheus is flying through the air in slow motion, then he crashes down at regular speed, delivering a knee attack. Now take a look at these shots from Reloaded when Morpheus is fighting the agent from the freeway chase scene. It's set up in a very similar way where the agent is on the bottom left, Morpheus is flying in slow motion in the same direction and also lands at regular speed with a knee attack. Now this is just a fun example to start off this list. I don't really think it serves a real deeper thematic purpose for these movies. Maybe Morpheus just really likes doing these slow-mo Matrix jumps because he's had a lot of practice doing them. You know, remember that? Yeah, he's good at doing the jump. Remember how the very first movie starts off with a famous scene where Trinity is fighting off a bunch of cops. Reloaded starts with Trinity also fighting off a bunch of cops. Well, I guess these guys are technically security guards, whatever. While this fight doesn't mirror the first movie's scene exactly, it does have a similar structure and visual style. Not as iconic as the first movie, but she also does a cool slow motion jump. There's a lot of kicking involved in both fights, including the same backwards kick, which I think they call the scorpion kick, or the spider kick or something, which seems to be Trinity's signature move, as she does it in every movie. And of course, both of these fight scenes end with Trinity going, whipping out her cell phone. You know, the old flip phones. They didn't have iPhones yet. That's the thing about iPhones, man. There's no cool way to, like, I'm in. Last example I have for Reloaded is not so much a visual callback, but more of a structural callback. This example I do think goes deeper than just, hey, remember that? The last act of the first movie involves Morpheus held captive in the Matrix by agents. Neo decides to go in against all the odds and the operator's better judgment to try and save him. He does so, but gets shot in the process and dies. Then Trinity brings him back to life through the power of love, I guess. The last act of Reloaded involves Morpheus, Neo, and a bunch of other team members stuck in a situation where things are starting to go very wrong very quickly. Against all the odds and the operator's better judgment, Trinity goes into the Matrix to try and save everybody. She does so, but gets shot and dies in the process. Then Neo brings her back to life with his one powers, combined with the powers of love, I guess. So what's going on here? 1. I think in both of these movies' cases, this is just an exciting way to write a final act for a movie. You have people in a bad situation, you got another character going in to save them against all odds, you have one of the main characters getting shot, you have another bringing him back to life, a whole bunch of dramatic stuff happens. It's a good way to end an action movie. 2, I think this obviously is mirroring the structure of the end of the first movie. But 3, here's where it gets deeper. In a deeper sense, I think this is supposed to highlight the connection between Neo and Trinity. The fact that these two characters fell in love was all part of a plan by the Oracle. There are a number of fan theories nowadays that it was really Trinity who was the one the whole time, or that Neo copied a part of his anomaly code onto her when he revived her and stuck her hand in her like he did when he deleted Agent Smith. This serves one of those underlying themes that there is more to the connection between these two characters than is on the surface level of the fact that they're just a couple in these movies. There are no doubt other callbacks and references throughout Reloaded, but these were just some of my favorite examples. Now, on to Revolutions. Revolutions doesn't have as many visual or structural callbacks throughout the movie as Reloaded or Resurrections does. However, there is one big cool fight scene where they crammed in enough callbacks and references to make up for the rest of the movie. The scene I'm referring to is the one where Morpheus, Seraph, and Trinity fight their way into Club Hell to confront the Merovingian. Remember this famous scene in the first movie when the security guard stops mid-sentence as Neo is entering this cold-looking lobby with a bunch of pillars and he whips out all these guns?
Holy shit!
Well, while it's not exactly the same, we do get a coat check lady who stops mid-sentence while our heroes are entering this cold-looking lobby with a bunch of pillars as they whip out their guns. We get a little sequence of Morpheus dual-wielding these submachine guns as he whips around a pillar, just like Neo was dual-wielding submachine guns, emerging guns blazing from behind a pillar. It is Trinity who gets the most callbacks during the scene. We also get another instance of Trinity using one of the guards' guns on himself. Then she does this cool slow motion aerial cartwheel thing, just like in the lobby shootout. Then we have the fight ending with Trinity doing a slow motion jump and kicking the bad guy all the way into the back wall, just like the fight ended in that first movie. When the fight is over and the heroes are walking away, the bad guy that Trinity just kicked into that wall then falls down in a rather comical manner, just like that tile did at the end of the lobby shootout. Oh yeah, and both scenes end with them getting into an elevator. This shot isn't necessarily connected to the lobby shootout scene, but in both movies we do get an establishing shot of a techno S&M nightclub dance floor as the camera pans across it. The last strictly visual callback in this movie that I want to mention is in both movies when Agent Smith is defeated, he explodes in a rather similar manner. It's a bunch of white light comes out of him, he breaks into a million pieces going "Rawr!" I'm not sure how this next example ties into any bigger picture stuff. I just think it's really interesting that in Resurrections, towards the end of that movie, we get a callback to one of Trinity's lines towards the end of Revolutions.
So beautiful. Beautiful.
The last thing I want to cover from Revolutions is from one of my favorite scenes where Bane/Smith does his surprise attack on Neo and Trinity. This one is not exactly subtle because Bane says it himself when he's got a gun pointed to Neo on the ground in front of him, and he says,
"We've been here before, you and I, remember? I do. I think of nothing else."
Enough about Revolutions, on to Resurrections. The visual references and callbacks and little deja vu moments that I noticed in Matrix 4 are the stuff that got me really excited and wanted to make this video in the first place. So, hope you like them as much as I do. Resurrections opens with a scene that is intentionally, obviously, purposefully supposed to be a callback to the first scene in Matrix 1 when Trinity fights the cops. What's most interesting about this opening scene in Resurrections to me is how accurately, in terms of the shots, the editing, and just the pacing of this, how accurately they mimic the scene in the very first movie. I spent way too much time editing these two scenes on top of one another so they'll play at exactly the same time, and you can see the insane level of detail they put into this.
Zeke, I'm in. Is everything
Captain, like a trap.
Do not move! We will shoot! Very slowly. Here we go. You were warned. Lieutenant, you were given now.
No, Lieutenant, your men are already dead.
All right.
Also, like the first movie, after the opening scene with Trinity, we get a Matrix code transition into Neo's introduction scene. In the first movie, we find him sleeping in his apartment while searching for Morpheus. In Resurrections, while he's not asleep, he might as well be because he's bored out of his mind at his job while searching for Morpheus. Neo's introduction scene so closely mirrors his introduction scene in the first movie that they're almost identical. This one I think is really cool. Check it out.
What the hell?
Something wrong?
Just a little crash.
Also, while we're talking about Neo at his workplace, we get a very similar little sequence of shots where he's talking to his boss. This next example is a little obvious, but later on we get a scene where Morpheus contacts Neo at his workplace to try and convince him to get out of there. The rest of these scenes don't play out exactly the same, and I guess Morpheus failed in both of these attempts, but we do get a similar callback line of him saying, "Go, now," like in the first movie, but this time it's over text, and I don't know, it just doesn't have the same impact as the first one. Next example from Resurrections is a scene where Neo wakes up in the real world in his bathtub pod thing. The shot sequence is almost identical to the first movie's version. You know, how many ways is there to film this scene? Yeah, sure, I guess, but it's interesting that it matches so closely and it seems to fit this pattern that I'm noticing here. In Matrix 1, one of the first times Neo wakes up in the real world is on a ship, and we see him, and he's alone in this room. In Matrix 4, we get a very similar sequence of shots, and he's feeling around the plugs and the connection thingies that are in the back of his neck and his arms. And as he starts to remove them, the ship's captain comes in and has a little scene with him. In both Resurrections and the original movie, we get a shot where the ship's captain says to Neo,
"Welcome to the real world."
Welcome back to the real world.
There's also a very similar shot of the ship's nameplate as Neo is being shown around. This one's fairly obvious, but the scene where they load Neo into the construct so he doesn't lose his mind is shot and edited in a very similar way as is done in the first movie. This one's maybe a little more subtle, but there's a scene in the first movie where Neo meets the operator Tank for the first time, and they shake hands. Then Neo notices something interesting about his forearm. In Resurrections, we get a scene where Neo meets Seek the operator for the first time and notices something interesting about his forearm. This one's not that deep, just interesting, but towards the end of Resurrections, we get a shot of the bullet shells dropping from the helicopter, pretty much an identical shot to the one in the first movie. People criticize Resurrections for, a lot of reasons. Some may write off what I just showed as being lazy and unoriginal. However, I do think these callbacks work on several different levels. One level, obviously, is that there's some member berries moments, some little callbacks for fans where you could be like, hey, remember that? Yeah, I remember that. In a slightly deeper, more thematic sense, I think a lot of these scenes and shots that are so identical to the originals ties into one of my favorite quotes from Resurrections.
"We're all trapped inside these strange repeating loops."
This, of course, ties into some of the more meta commentary aspects of the fourth movie.
Our beloved parent company, Warner Brothers, has decided to make a sequel to the trilogy.
What?
How predictable, lame, unoriginal, and not to mention ironic it is that we're getting a sequel/reboot to the series when literally every other franchise out there today is getting rebooted just for the sake of being rebooted to make some money off nostalgia.
Nothing comforts anxiety like little nostalgia.
This whole movie is a commentary on how everything Hollywood is cranking out lately is an unoriginal rehash, regurgitation of things that we already know.
This is not over yet. I will sequel franchise spin-off.
Well, that's about all I've got for today. If you stuck around this far, thank you for watching. I appreciate it as always. And if you're one of the people who hates the Matrix sequels, and especially Resurrections because, not enough bullet time or something like that, which I totally understand, I hope this video can help share some of my observations about these movies, that there are a lot of details in them that while they may not be as groundbreaking as the first movie, they're certainly interesting, and you can appreciate all the thought put into them that rewards itself upon multiple viewings. That's about all I've got for today, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.